The dream of supersonic commercial air travel once captivated the world, promising rapid transatlantic journeys and unmatched glamour. Yet history taught us a hard lesson. The famous Concorde, despite its iconic status, wrestled with economic viability, the disturbance of deafening sonic booms, and astronomical operating costs. Over time, it became more legend than practical mode of mainstream travel. Today, however, Boom Technology Inc., an upstart company, claims to have cracked the code with its sleek, futuristic Overture jetliner. This design promises efficient, sustainable, and most importantly, tidily profitable supersonic flights. Skepticism remains, though. Aviation breakthroughs often collide with harsh economic and logistical realities. So can Boom genuinely overcome the challenges that once grounded its predecessors, or is Overture destined to repeat their costly mistakes? From groundbreaking technological leaps to looming financial hurdles, we'll explore whether Boom's ambitious vision represents the future of aviation or merely echoes its supersonic past. So let's begin.
Ever read a headline like US-Iran indirect talks conclude first phase, second round plans, and wonder, alright, fair enough, what are the other guys saying? Well, for that exact story, some outlets framed it as diplomatic progress. Others called it political theater, and others just didn't even mention it. Well, today's sponsor, Ground News, puts all of that into one place. It pulls coverage from over 50,000 sources across the political spectrum, with bias ratings, ownership data, and a blind spot feed that shows you what your bubble might be missing. It's not about telling you what to think, it's about showing you everything, so you can make up your own mind. That's especially useful for international coverage, where narratives can vary wildly depending on the source. You will be surprised how much gets left out when you only read one side. And look, right now, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan for unlimited access. Just head to ground.news/megaprojects and start seeing the full picture. Today, thanks to them for sponsoring. And now back to today's episode.
Backgrounds. Aviation technology has come a really long way in recent decades. Jumbo jets, for example, were once the only viable way to achieve direct long-haul flights, thanks to their vast fuel tanks and the enormous number of paying passengers that they could accommodate. Today, however, such aircraft are all but relics of the past, with the Boeing 747 and Airbus A380 both out of production, and most airlines, aside from a few geographically fortunate ones, gradually retiring them from service. The era of jumbo jets is nearing its end. Taking their place are smaller, wide bodies like the 787 and the Airbus A350. These aircraft use ultralight composite materials combined with all-new super-high bypass and thus incredibly efficient turbofan engines, delivering efficiency that the old-school true jumbo jets could scarcely imagine. In doing so, they keep long-haul air travel affordable while opening up whole new, more niche point-to-point routes that just didn't make sense when airlines were required to pack upwards of 500 people onto their big jets. This achievement is nothing short of incredible in terms of human progress, but it isn't exactly what the pioneers of the commercial jetliner envisioned for the future. After all, they hailed from the Jerry Anderson School of Engineering, where machines were always meant to be bigger, cooler, and above all else, faster. The early Cold War period's obsession with creating a supersonic jetliner, one that could travel faster than the speed of sound, is a prime example of this drive. The Americans attempted to build such an aircraft with the Boeing 2707, but ultimately failed. Meanwhile, the Soviets succeeded, with their Tupolev 144 taken to the skies in 1968. Indeed, it eventually reached speeds of Mach 2.15. Similarly, the British and the French collaborated to develop the Concorde, which first flew in 1969 and achieved speeds of Mach 2.04. However, these successes in supersonic jetliner development were short-lived. The Tu-144 carried passengers for only 3 years before being withdrawn, a fate driven partly by the exorbitant operating costs and partly by the impact of a disastrous crash in 1973 that left the Soviet public extremely reluctant to fly on it. And similarly, Concorde, while seemingly more successful due to its 27 years in passenger service, turned out to be something of a dud. It quickly ended up operating only a single transatlantic route, largely because of its hideously loud sonic boom, as the shockwave produced when an object travels through the air faster than the speed of sound, and merely managed to squeeze into the tiniest margin of profitability by the time it was withdrawn in 2003. With that, the prophesized future of supersonic commercial aviation was effectively declared dead. Experience had shown it to be an immensely cool concept, but ultimately just an unviable fantasy. Or so the story used to go anyway, because in 2016, a previously nearly unheard of company named Boom Technology Incorporated began generating some intriguing headlines. Supposedly, supersonic jetliners were making a comeback, and these Boom folks were poised to deliver, this time doing it the proper way. And yet, here we are, nearly a decade after those headlines first emerged, and still nothing has materialized. So, what gives? Will they eventually pull it off, or are they doomed to share the same fate as the Concorde and the Tu-144, if they even get that far? Well, that calls for some explanation, so let's dive in and start picking the story apart. Boom's origins. Boom, and we'll stick with that name just for simplicity, was founded in 2014 by a man named Blake Scholl. He isn't exactly the kind of person one might expect to eventually crack supersonic airliners, given that his background lies not in aerospace but in technology. Blake began his professional journey as a software engineer at Amazon back in 2001 before going on to co-found Kima Labs, a mobile technology startup later acquired by Groupon in 2012. Tech may have paid the bills, but aviation has always been his real passion. His childhood was marked by regular enthusiastic visits to aviation museums across America, and in his adult years he earned his private pilot license in 2008, along with an accompanying instrument rating in 2011, which, to simplify things quite a bit, simply meant that he was allowed to fly in poor weather conditions. Now, when the sale of Kimber Labs left him with more than enough cash and plenty of time to spare, he reasoned that the moment was finally right to turn his passion into his vocation. He aimed high, setting his sights on achieving the ultimate ambition of any aviation enthusiast: reliable, massive, and reasonably affordable supersonic commercial travel. And so, in 2014, Boom was born. Even though Scholl was very wealthy by that point, with unverified reports placing his fortune in the hundreds of millions of dollars, he wasn't rich enough to build an airliner from the ground up, a level of wealth that typically requires hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. With few other options, he invested a substantial lump sum from the sale of Kimber Labs into Boom and set out, cap in hand, for additional funding. And he did quite well at this. By November 2023, Boom announced that it had secured more than $700 million in funding. A significant portion of that investment came from the Neom Investment Fund, a Saudi Arabian trust aimed at fostering innovation and development in the Middle East. In addition, Boom also secured funding from Japan Airlines and a variety of other, rather drably named venture funds that we're not going to bore you with. And if you're thinking this makes Boom sound very, very legit, you'd be absolutely right. An assumption that's only reinforced by the fact that its eventual customers, the airlines, have taken a look at what they're doing and really like what they see. So far, Boom has secured orders for 15 aircraft from United Airlines and 20 from American, along with options, airplane Bs, for the right but not the obligation to purchase aircraft from Japan Airlines, who are provisionally interested in 20. In addition, there are a further 35 and 40 options from United and American respectively, and a final 51 from unnamed customers. Now, if you've done the math, this means that theoretically at least as many as 181 of Boom's supersonic airliners could be taking to the skies in the near future. And those numbers are impressive, especially when you consider that only 20 Concordes and 16 Tu-144s were built in total. So how is it that nearly a decade has passed and we're still yet to see aircraft zooming faster than the speed of sound again? Well, in short, the answer is that building supersonic airliners is, believe it or not, really rather difficult. Boom has chosen to take a careful, steady approach, learning to walk before considering running, so that when they eventually launch their airliner, every detail is perfect. Now, let's see what they've been doing as part of that process. The XB-1 Baby Boom demonstrator. They started by proving to the world, investors, and airlines that they could build a supersonic aircraft. Boom's ambitious plans for supersonic travel couldn't remain lofty promises alone. They needed to demonstrate that supersonic flight could be efficient, safe, and commercially viable. Enter the XB-1 or Baby Boom, a one-third scale demonstrator designed to test the technologies that would eventually power Boom's full-scale airliner. Revealed in November 2016, the XB-1 measures 68 feet long with a 21-foot wingspan and is powered by 3 venerable General Electric J85-15 turbojet engines, the same ones typically seen in the Canadair CF5, though Boom made some mild adjustments to tailor them for this unique application. Using off-the-shelf engines was a deliberate choice, as the XB-1's primary mission was to test the fuselage and various flight systems that would eventually be scaled up for supersonic travel. Key innovations include the extensive use of carbon fiber composites to save weight, a significant departure from the aluminium construction used by Concorde, and an augmented reality system designed to provide pilots with full visibility on the ground, replacing the actuated droop nose found on both the Concorde and the Tu-144. In the end, it all comes down to one point: physics. That unforgiving mistress has determined that if things are going to move fast, they need to be pointy, and that shape isn't exactly conducive to optimal visibility. For Boom, the XB-1 was naturally a significant milestone. It was actual, tangible, and real evidence that the company was putting its money where its mouth is. However, as with most ambitious aerospace projects, progress was slower than anticipated. Initially expected to fly much earlier, the XB-1 finally took to the skies on March 22, 2024, nearly 8 years behind schedule. When it finally lifted off from the Mojave Air and Spaceport, Boom's chief test pilot, Bill Shoemaker, only pushed it to an altitude of 7,120 feet and a modest speed of 273 miles an hour. Now, this cautious approach totally normal in flight testing, in case a mechanical issue, an unexpected whoopsie-daisy, should arise, so test pilots never push the aircraft too hard on early flights. They start off slowly, giving the craft a gentle wiggle to understand its characteristics. Then, if it all goes well, they gradually increase the load, adding a bit more wiggle here and a bit more speed there, until a full understanding of its performance is safely established. Now, all went remarkably well for the XB-1, which proved to be a remarkably competently assembled little craft. Consequently, the launch day was set for January 28, 2025. The day arrived, and the XB-1 reached Mach 1.22 at 35,290 feet. That's roughly 750 miles an hour. This milestone was not only significant for Boom, but also a historic moment for aviation in general. The XB-1 became the first privately developed civil aircraft to ever break the sound barrier, an achievement that Boom eagerly publicized as evidence that their vision was far from wishful thinking. Perhaps the most impressive detail of that flight, one that many articles tend to overlook, was not only the remarkable speed. The XB-1 accomplished its feat without creating a sonic boom audible from the ground, which only added to the significance of this test flight. It's really hard to overstate just how big of a deal this was. Concorde's sonic boom was one of the main factors that undermined its commercial viability. Overland, both aviation authorities and the public were none too pleased with the deafening crack, and so gradually, airspace permissions around the world were revoked. This left Concorde largely confined to the single route where the noise wasn't an issue: transatlantic crossings between New York and either Paris or London. Based on this precedent alone, there was reason to be optimistic that Boom might actually be able to pull it off. As for the future of the XB-1, its mission was complete, and it was later retired after making its 13th and final flight on February 10th, 2025. The Endgame. While they were busy proving their supersonic ambitions with the XB-1, Boom was quietly working on their true endgame, a full-scale airliner. To make that happen, they needed an engine, and they weren't planning on buying one off the shelf this time. Despite sharing numerous detailed proposals, none of the major legacy manufacturers, Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, or even Russia's Kuznetsov Design Bureau were interested, so Boom had to develop the engine themselves. In December 2022, Boom announced the Symphony engine, a purpose-built power plant designed to deliver the thrust and efficiency required for supersonic commercial travel. Producing 35,000 pounds of thrust at takeoff and optimized for a Mach 1.7 cruise, the Symphony engine was the key to achieving their ambitious vision. As an added bonus, Boom claims that the engine would run on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. Fortunately, even though they had now committed to developing their own engine, they were able to secure assistance from industry experts. The established giants remained indifferent, which meant that smaller companies, many of which are relatively unknown, stepped in to provide their technical expertise when it was needed most. For example, Florida Turbine Technologies took the lead on design, drawing on the experience that they'd gained while developing engine components for the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II. Meanwhile, GE Additive, a subsidiary of General Electric that prides itself on being a world leader in metal additive design and manufacturing, contributed 3D printing expertise to help reduce weight and simplify production. Additionally, Standard Aero, an aerospace maintenance firm, was brought on board to handle assembly and long-term maintenance at its San Antonio facility, which was configured to produce up to 330 engines per year if demand justified it. The Symphony engine itself features a boom-designed axisymmetric supersonic intake, a variable geometry, low-noise exhaust nozzle, and a passively cooled high-pressure turbine built to withstand the extreme conditions of high-speed flight. Crucially, Boom has promised that Symphony will meet ICAO Chapter 14 noise regulations, ensuring that it won't become a loud, disruptive presence every time it takes off, unlike Concorde, which regularly drew furious letters. However, a great engine means nothing without an equally well-designed aircraft. So, what will the Symphony be powering? Well, that would be the Boom Overture. Designed to carry between 64 and 80 passengers at speeds of Mach 1.7, this aircraft, unlike Concorde's slender delta-wing design, adopts a gull-wing configuration. This approach is said to improve lift, especially at low speeds, a known weakness of Concorde, while also reducing overall drag to enable a more efficient supersonic cruise. Additionally, the aircraft will be packed with carbon composite materials, eliminating every extra gram possible to maximize both range and efficiency. Even more exciting is that Overture is truly moving forward. The Overture Superfactory in Greensboro, North Carolina, where it will be built, was reportedly completed in June 2024 and is expected to have the capacity to assemble up to 33 aircraft per year. It's no wonder that investors and airlines alike are backing the Overture. It certainly sounds all rather promising, doesn't it? So why is there pessimism? Why can't we just end this video with a note like, sure, it took a while, but they got the cash for the design and the factory. Get your credit cards out, aviation fans. You're about to take a supersonic flight. Now, the truth is, the issues are really too complex to wrap up in a short final remark. So instead, let's dive deeper and examine the potential causes of failure. Why it might be doomed to fail. Now, the first and most pressing challenge is economic viability. Concorde was notoriously expensive to operate, burning enormous amounts of fuel while carrying relatively few passengers. During its development, it was reasoned that Concorde was always intended to be the preserve of the elite, essentially an all-business class flight in terms of ticket price. However, after its first flight, and before its commercial introduction, the 1973 oil crisis struck, abruptly ending the era of cheap post-war oil. In an instant, the equations had completely changed, and Concorde would need to transition from an all-business class flight to one priced exclusively at first-class levels. It became no longer the preserve of the elite, but of the ultra-elite, which is why those normal old boys who once had the privilege of riding it always mention having to save for nearly a decade to afford their ticket. On their part, they maintain that technological advancements will make Overture significantly more fuel efficient, thereby preventing a repeat of past situations. Yet supersonic flight is inherently energy intensive. Fuel prices aren't cheap these days, and there's simply no avoiding that. Furthermore, although their plan to use 100% sustainable aviation fuel does sound wonderfully eco-friendly and conjures images of cute little bunny rabbits frolicking joyfully in pristine meadows untouched by human hands, it might prove to be an economically dreadful idea. You see, sustainable aviation fuel is really, really expensive. Since it's a biofuel that doesn't use food crops, prime agricultural land, or fresh water in its production, it almost certainly is always going to be expensive. Its production involves layer upon layer of complexity, extra steps that drive up the cost that you just don't get from pumping dead dinosaurs out of the ground and jiggling their hydrocarbons around in a refinery to make the kind of fuel that jet engines drink. Worse still, airlines, let's be brutally honest, only care about their environmental impact insofar as it helps them avoid negative headlines or prevents them from losing venture capital funding. This means there's basically bugger all sustainable aviation fuel available, and as a result, almost no infrastructure for producing it exists. Boom would either have to build that infrastructure themselves or buy their fuel in comparatively low volumes from third parties with no economies of scale to benefit from. And we aren't exaggerating when we say basically bugger all either. 2023, only 0.2% of all global jet fuel used was sustainable aviation fuels. By committing itself to such an expensive fuel, Boom runs the risk of being grounded before it can even take off. An incredible vision potentially thwarted by the cold and unyielding reality of economics. And while we're on the subject of money, Boom simply might not have enough money. Period. Now, this may sound hard to believe since they've secured over $700 million in funding, but that amount, even as vast as it seems, is actually quite modest when it comes to aircraft development. Consider the Concorde. Its development cost, by upper estimates, was £2.1 billion in 1976 money. Adjusted for inflation and converted to USD, that comes out to roughly $20 billion. So maybe you see the problem. But let's step away from supersonics for a moment and consider modern aircraft development in general. Here's a quick bullet list of some recent aircraft and their development costs. The Comac C919, China's first large homegrown jet. Estimates for its development range from the $9.5 billion mark claimed by Comac and the Chinese state to the $20 billion suggested by Western analysts. The Boeing 737 MAX series, which is essentially just a modification of a jet design that has already been around since the 1960s. Its internal development cost target was $2 billion, though it's speculated that the actual cost was roughly double that. The Yakolev MC-21, a Russian narrow-body aircraft expected to enter service in late 2025 or early 2026. Its development cost is believed to be $6.5 billion. So you're probably getting the idea that $700 million Boom secured might seem like a lot at first glance, but when you really think about it, it's actually not nearly enough. Operational logistics adds yet another layer of difficulty here. Concorde required extensive maintenance, with British Airways and Air France each keeping spare aircraft and crews ready to handle its constant upkeep. Supersonic aircraft naturally experience greater wear and tear because of the extreme temperatures and stresses associated with high-speed flight. Even if the Overture is designed to be more cost-effective, its maintenance costs might spiral out of control, making it unattractive for airlines with tight profit margins. Conclusion. So then, with everything considered, will the Overture happen? And frankly, we just don't know. A few years ago, if you had asked us this question, we would have firmly said no, deeming the project too ambitious and unproven. However, the success of the XB-1 has complicated that issue considerably. They have, seemingly, resolved the sonic boom problem, a major hurdle, and they now have a factory in place. Yet the matter of funding does remain. Regardless of how you look at it, they just don't seem to have enough money. What we will say, however, is that we genuinely wish them every success. Not only does Scholl, from what we can tell, come across as a thoroughly decent dude, but if he succeeds, and if our near future does indeed feature overtures booming everywhere faster than the speed of sound, we will finally be one step closer to that glorious Jerry Anderson future we were all teased with, yet ultimately denied. And that, simply put, would be pretty f***ing cool. Thanks for watching.